Thank you for being here. Today, I have my guest, Peter Weaver, with us of Orbital Advisors. Peter, thank you for being here.
Great to be with you, Lindsey. Thanks. Nice to see you.
It's nice to see you. And I guess to kick it off, let's just dive in. What's getting you excited about your work these days?
Honestly, if I were going to pick one word, I'd have to say the overall landscape. Right now, we're witnessing much broader awareness, even an acknowledgement, I think, of the importance of energy security, mineral security, as it relates to individual quality of life, the overall health of the economy, the stability of the nation, and the broader world if we wanted to get into the ethereal. But this is a very exciting moment in time to influence how the next round of energy production, mineral production takes place. And I think there's an opportunity to accelerate how we become more energy and mineral self-sufficient in North America.
Well, I couldn't agree more. And, when we met this past year at AE, I just thought, man, we have a whole lot to talk about. And so I'm really excited to do that with you today. Talk to me a little bit as that relates to orbital advisors, for those who are not familiar with you.
So, sure. So, Orbital Advisors, we are using satellite technology and broadly defined the world of satellite constellations currently available to pull down data, to pull down imagery, to create intelligence, insights on the world around us and try to convert those insights into something useful to industries for decision making. I think intelligence products really are the right way to describe it. And within the mining sector, we can think about different solutions and insights that could make for better decision making by the operator across the life cycle. So we're thinking about how imagery can be used for better decision making.
Which is really cool. I had the opportunity to see some of the imagery that you showed me once before. And I mean, not being in the tech space, so to speak, it blows my mind what you're able to get and sort of how clear it is and how interesting. And so I think the application of it, as you were talking about, this sort of being the moment we should be seizing it appropriately, that this gives individuals and companies the ability to sort of watch and see what's going on. And I also think that translates really significantly into the idea of communities being involved in the development of mining and it being sort of front and center in their minds because they can kind of consistently be checking in on it. So I know that took us a whole bunch of different directions. So you pick which way you want to go.
Okay. Well, you talked about the community engagement. And so as I've honestly been working in this space. I did the math before jumping on the call with you for going on 9 years, which is hard to believe, of how to integrate satellite imagery into operational solutions. And my background is the oil and gas side of energy. So in thinking about an application to mining, which is in many ways very closely related to the oil and gas exploration and production element, I would engage people on their pain points. What are the issues that keep you up at night? What's challenging? What are the elusive difficulties? And there would always be a fairly broad, enumerable list of the types of issues. The economics often came to the forefront. Slowness of advancing projects has always been an issue with operators in mining. This was reiterated several times at the AEMA conference just in December, where if I heard it once, I heard it a dozen times. Average cost of mining life cycle on the order of 22, 25, 28 years, which is a crazy long time. And part of that's permitting, but not all of it. Digging deeper into these pain points, shrinking workforce and labor concerns, trying to get to the core issue beneath them, so often came to the idea of the communities where we do operate or where we want to operate don't necessarily like us. In fact, they often have antagonistic relationships, and that bottlenecks any progress. To what extent is that slowness or that difficult relationship based on historic mining issues that have been in the news. We certainly don't need to enumerate the incidents that have happened, but there's a lack of trust is how I would summarize it.
Sure.
And how do you alleviate trust issues? I think transparency is an area where satellites can really deliver an offset to build back trust. And if trust can be reestablished, then relationships, conversations, policy advancements, tribal elders and community leaders can come together on what are the mutual benefits of a mining project, the mutual benefits of an expansion of a project. And hopefully, and I believe this is significant, and it ties back to what I said I'm excited about, this moment in time where there's alignment between policy and a market environment for such demand for minerals and mining products of all sorts. Even a public sentiment that seems more aligned with the idea of more self-sufficiency domestically. If we can bridge the trust deficit, utilize technologies to offer transparency, hopefully we can really see a resurgence and an expansion of mining in North America that has felt very elusive, and certainly how I've heard it from the field is it just seems like it takes too long and is elusive.
Well, I agree. And it's interesting. I think elusive is a good term to use, because often I come in and try to find people to plug into mining operations, to exploration groups, to help solve some of these problems. And I think that there are so many great ideas. And I think bridging the gap with technologies is one of the ways that we get across this playing field where we don't have enough people and or individuals that are bringing skills in certain areas. So utilizing technology and gaining knowledge and being transparent, I think helps us to get to the finish line. And I think we're going to be doing a whole lot more of that as we move forward, because sometimes a person is not the silver bullet. Sometimes it's quite literally giving somebody something to look at, talking to them in a different way, saying this is accessible to you as we're working on developing this. And, as you said, sort of saying, look, let's just have the conversation. And that goes a very long way, I think, with those who perhaps are not ready to engage fully in the mining conversation and say, but I looked at the satellite stuff because they got a notice that this was available in our community. And so now I'm curious. And so maybe it's going to create a gateway to engage in different kinds of conversations and create community support. And I'd be hopeful that that's some of the utilization and the capability for it as we move forward.
I think there definitely is a shift in the right direction. Policy does matter, and policy that is encouraging and favorable to self-reliance puts our industry in a much more positive light. I think technology is very attractive to the generation coming into the workforce. And thinking as someone who came into mining from a different sector, the first thing many people think about is shovels in the ground and old technologies. But the way stewardship is being implemented today, and new sensor technology and communication possibilities, the use of so many minerals going into new technologies, there's a lot of really compelling progress in the industry, in the sector. I also think that it's becoming recognized, and I think this is also very important, that the mere idea of sustainability is not really meaningful unless there are sufficient resources in which to maintain our life cycle, our standard of life, our lifestyles that we've become kind of accustomed to and appreciate. So how do we maintain an abundance of the materials necessary while also being responsible? And technology has a huge role to play in that. So better intelligence, better decision-making, improved efficiencies, these are tremendous areas of alignment.
Well, I agree. And one of the comments that you made in terms of you having technology be an attraction point for alternative sources of talent, right? I mean, you're already an alternative source of talent coming from oil and gas primarily and coming into the mining industry. But with that, I think we're getting new forms of thought. We're getting different kinds of vantage points and technologies and skill sets, et cetera. But if we're going to talk about technology being one of those areas that draws in talent, I think it could also draw in funding. And we all desperately need that as well, right? But we talk about needing to make mining sexy. And I think that people will be attracted to not only what it affords them when they finally understand where the minerals come from, but also to joining the advocacy side and the cause, and then be more susceptible to investing or joining the mining industry as a contributor from a skills perspective. I think it's a really cool thing to be putting this out there. And obviously it translates into other industries as well.
Well, the economics are super important, and it ties a little bit back to my own thesis of the importance of enhancing trust through transparency to accelerate the cycle to advance new projects. Because the rubber hits the road on the bottom line. And a project, a mining project that could take 30 years, 25 years to clear all the hurdles has an incredibly different economic profile than one that could be advanced in 10 years. And right now, certainly for the last few years, we've had this confluence of demand in the marketplace for new minerals. And on top of that, a real compelling need from a national security standpoint to bring existing production capacities into our own shores. So there's market growth, there's onshoring necessity, and I have observed that there really is a hunger in the finance community to invest in this sector, provided there's a higher degree of certainty that the risks are manageable, as opposed to what I've seen as very ambiguous policy or, frankly, community risk. That's very hard. I mean, there's no actuarial data on what's the likelihood that a community will step in and say, at the end of the day, we just don't want you. It's not going to pass muster. So getting ahead of that, transparency, trust, and dialogue. So yes, this idea, the people matter. One thing I've really loved about this sector is I enjoy the people. I enjoy going to the events. I've enjoyed meeting you and so many others that you've had on your podcast, and just thinking through these fairly broad-ranging ideas on how do we advance this moment, take advantage of market demand, take advantage of a real need to grow, to do so profitably, hunger capital for a place to put it, but we've got to bridge these immeasurable gaps. And it's almost the elephant in the room. How do we confront the need to have better dialogue with our communities, better dialogue with our policymakers? I think this is a moment in time where the policymakers are very receptive. And honestly, I think the communities are interested too.
I'm starting to see that as well. And I'm really encouraged by some of the accounts that I'm hearing from others that have different networks where they're saying, hey, I went to book club and my book club person's daughter said that she thought mining was cool. And I thought, what in the world? Like, what a random comment, right? But like, it's so encouraging to hear that it's not just this very foreign concept that perhaps happens in different jurisdictions that doesn't affect our daily life. Because as you know, and I know, there is not a single facet of our world that exists without mining for the most part, right? So from medicine to transportation to infrastructure to agriculture to all the rest of the things, not to mention your cell phone, which everybody uses as an example, but it's like it touches every facet of our life. And we've let this go under the radar as sort of this sleeper industry. And it's been a disservice to us ultimately. And so now, as you said, I think we've got this sort of critical mass to onshore this and figure out how to do it. But we cannot wait 27 years for a mine to go into production. And so utilizing tools and figuring out how to do things in an accelerated but responsible fashion is what we have to do. And so getting these tools to do it of importance. One of the things I was talking to another guest on my podcast about last week, I think. Emily King said, look, the majors have pushed down the risk and the responsibility into junior and startup companies because they're unwilling to absorb that risk themselves. And so really they use junior exploration companies to do that part. And I think that where you sit in the marketplace applies across the spectrum for a junior, for a major, for whatever. And so that's massive opportunity. And I think it's got to be feeling really cool. You just have to sort of figure out how to get everybody to understand that this is a great tool. Do you have feelings about that? Or am I sort of overstating where you should be?
No, I think it's a big conversation, Lindsey, and
Yep.
I love that you're kind of acknowledging that. There's a little bit of a mental shift, I think, to acknowledge how we bridge the trust gap. And I've seen a lot of folks talking about how do we engage with communities and what do we talk to them about and what captures their attention. The piece that has really gotten me excited is the ability to use a technology platform to feed that dialogue on an ongoing basis, especially when, quite honestly, with satellite technology, frequently revisited, you don't necessarily know what's going to show up next time. So the trust has to go both ways.
Yep.
Is the industry, the mining sector writ large, willing to say, you know what, we're here to be good players.
Yep.
We're here to be part of a larger conversation to move the ball forward. And yes, there have been some bad actors in the past. Of course, it's not me, but let's make sure moving forward, we can acknowledge what are the goals?
Yep.
How are we planning to get there? We can define that. And so how do the other stakeholders, and I don't always love the term stakeholders, but again, those in the community who are very concerned, rightly so, about preserving what
Sure.
they love about where they live, they're correct to do that. I think the mining companies feel the same way, quite frankly. And so using this type of ongoing imagery, whether it's just plain old pictures or getting into some of the spectroscopy of moisture content, vegetative health, contamination, pollution, that we can actually tease out these analytical features to feed a conversation. Sometimes there will be very clear indications of something either as expected or amiss. Sometimes there will be some ambiguous representations of data and imagery that foster the dialogue in a timely fashion so that we can all address them. Because I think just like in the oil and gas sector where I grew up, we haven't been great about communicating how our products are integral in every aspect of our lives. And also we haven't been great about necessarily speaking through how much we have a shared common interest in protecting the locations where we work, the people we work with, our communities. It's this integration of shared interests that really makes it all work. And that's not recognized when it's two different parties on different sides of the fence. We're really pretty much on the same side of the fence here. And I think, again, it's reflected in this moment in time, in this day and age, where we all recognize we have to do more for ourselves. And everyone wants to be part of that. I think it's exciting.
I think you're a really good ambassador for that. I would nominate you. No, but I think all of this conversation, part of what I really like about it is that it's so accessible, and that as long as somebody's willing to share it, that really this does become a tool for everybody. And part of where I'm sort of thinking ahead is, in mine sites and in certain areas, there's security risks, both for those who work in mining as well as those who perhaps are stealing, or there's maybe artisanal mining around, and everybody has to be accountable for what they're doing and how they come into the full life cycle. And I imagine that this also provides a tool for some of that.
Yes, artisanal mining versus illicit mining. These have significant implications on communities, on worker safety, on fatalities, and very much from a maker's standpoint, when artisanal project has an illicit component, anything that goes sideways is going to really be crippling to a policymaker who ends up in front of the cameras having to explain how this was allowed to happen in the first place. How do we, again, as an industry, advance the necessity of growing production and doing so within some defined boundaries that are reasonable,
Yep.
frankly, such that the illicit mining doesn't have to take place. Because
Right.
we know that happens because it's less complicated to break the rules than it is to simply play by the rules. Enhancing transparency so that the policy environment can allow projects to advance at a reasonable pace
Yeah.
is a huge part of that. And
Yeah.
on the flip side, from a defensive standpoint, frankly, satellite technology can allow visibility into areas where this type of activity might be happening that it's unexpected or should not be. So
Right.
again, having the right types of relationships between the operators themselves, frankly, policymakers, what do we agree on should be happening? And if we want to define what should we be watching for to defend against,
Yep.
that's been the real intent of what we're building at Orbital Advisors, is a platform that allows us to collaborate with the participants to provide them a a rather easy, cost-effective visibility, transparency to those types of solutions. And
Sure.
what do the operators want to do with that type of information? They can use it for themselves for operational decision making, which is great.
Right.
But I really do believe that the higher value is to foster the broader dialogue with parties outside of the corporate entity itself, because that's where the roadblocks occur. And that's where the need for enhanced trust, enhanced transparency, I keep coming back to those because I think they're integral to how we move from a 29, 30-year project startup cycle down to single digits.
Well, yes, and we have to do that. One of the things that I like can't help but like visualize and romanticize probably a bit is that, I've always said mining needs a Super Bowl commercial. We need to get out there. We need to tell people what it does, how it's done, where it's done, the people that are involved. And so, AEMA, which I love, has the I Am Mining campaign. And I think that is sort of like a small version in very human form as to what mining does. But we need a Super Bowl commercial. And the first image that pops into my head is one from Orbital Advisors, where it shows sort of a time lapse video of mine from when they first find it to through development, right? Or through operations, and say, like, hey, this is what this looks like. And you can speed it up and make it look really fancy and cool. And then have all the I Am mining people in it and talking about what they do and how they do it and why it's necessary and the impact it's had on their lives. And so, yeah, this is what's going on in the back of my head. So if I look vacant for any moment, like, it's because I'm basically visualizing you're part of the Super Bowl commercial that I can't afford to produce.
Oh, I love it. And given I live in the New Orleans suburbs, we just had the Super Bowl here the other day. So would love to be part of that. And I love the I Am Mining campaign. I've actually got the sticker on the back of my laptop. But the kind of the idea that I really love as kind of a marketing slogan that struck me is, before it was yours, it was mined.
Yep.
And so thinking about everything we touch, right? It's either in the air and we breathe it, or water, or it came from the ground. And whether that's fossils or minerals or, right, it came from this industry. What I would love to support as the dialogue is this whole idea that it really is a life cycle intelligence opportunity. Information on what's happening in a project from the early stages of exploration, where you're looking for indicator minerals at the surface to accelerate the identification of good discoveries and finds, then getting into planning and development, mapping and siting and awareness of sensitive areas, environmental sensitivities, and the extraction process. Of course, it always comes up that tailing ponds are a sensitivity, and different satellite platforms could be utilized for microscopic fissures in the structure of the retaining walls, chemical composition within the pond, and the potential for seepage from that pond to have the same chemical signatures outside, and pollution migration. And of course, closure is ultimately is the end state for these projects. Once the extraction operations are ceased, rehabilitating the natural environment with regrowth of vegetative, right, all the original vegetation and health. And imagery from space can provide the type of monitoring for stewardship and decision making while still fostering the community sense, the policymaker sense that these projects are proceeding as planned, as permitted, on schedule, and we have a basis for measuring and assessing. And absolutely, it's foundational to all things sustainable, frankly, sustaining our quality of life in a responsible fashion. That's what this is all about, and we're all on the same page.
Part of what I'm hearing, even though you haven't said the word yet, is that you might, and tell me how you feel about it. Part of what I'm hearing from you is not just this idea of transparency, not just this idea about educating, but this really becomes a collaborative piece between community and the company and finance and all of these other areas. And I think that finding all of that as a middle ground and saying this is a component where we can all meet at one spot, see it, believe it, talk about it, like the proof is in the pudding is a saying because people want to see it. And I think that this technology is absolutely part of that. But I think part of what we've been bad about, not just leaving mining as sort of an undercurrent or this secret industry that's been going on forever, but seeing it as believing it and figuring out how to collaborate with all of these various entities, government and policymakers and mining and all of that. This really does, I think, lean into that sentiment. And I've said forever, we need to figure out ways of sharing information and being transparent and collaborating, or we will not get to where we need to be. And so this is just another thing that collaboration made me sort of put it all together, but I think we just need to get there.
I agree with you so much, Lindsey. And in some of the biggest areas of life, I really do believe that the right path forward, identifying what needs to happen, should be, in most cases, fairly simple. The challenge is it doesn't mean it's easy. And I believe that the idea of transparency, visibility to enhance trust, which trust allows projects to move forward at a much more rapid pace. That advantages the economics. It advantages the community appeal. I think that translates to the workforce. All of these layers can be addressed, and it was no small epiphany as I was trying to identify how can satellites actually serve the mining industry, because we can go through, well, in exploration, it's finding indicator minerals. And in planning and development, it can do these things. And in extraction, it can help us with tailing pond contamination and all these things that I've talked about. And those individual capabilities, they're all great. How do you monetize them? What's the right price? Is it different? Well, all that's great. But where it really, to me, ties together, as you have inferred and seen, and I think the concept, again, it's a fairly simple concept. Employing it's not necessarily easy. We've been building a pathway to allow that, what I think is fairly easy, but there's an awareness of just imagining how this is possible, which is being built up today. And I'm glad to have this conversation for that very reason. How can we use this idea of technology platform, frankly, on orbit for imagery anywhere your operations exist, to foster the discussions that need to happen? Because everybody's already aligned that we need to have better communications. You've brought that up a couple of times, but how is challenging. And I think we can answer the how a little bit. And again, it addresses so many things wrapped up in one big ball.
Well, no, I appreciate that. But this is the how all of a sudden made me like rewind and think of, how did you come up with this idea?
Oh, gosh. Well, it really has been a journey, to be perfectly honest. And it's a longer journey than I expected. I really wouldn't have guessed when I was first asked the question about satellite imagery for operational solutions that the better part of a decade later, I'd still be supporting how industry can use this. And there's a hunger for the idea, and it's only been very recently that the growth of space tech, the rapid deployment of new constellations have become really a practical technology in place that we can use today. So that's new. In the process, exploring what those pain points really are and considering how a technology can offer a valuable, meaning worth paying for it, valuable solution, as opposed to technology for its own sake.
Sure.
Very easy to say, Look what I can do. Look at these pictures. Aren't they cool? I can do this. I can do that. Well, typically, I have found that gets met with, from a layman, so what? Well, answering that so what has really been my own journey in oil and gas and energy. I've got a nice portfolio of solutions there, which is really great. In mining, it has been a little bit more elusive because as we go through the various stages of the life cycle, the technical solutions may be very different, needing
Sure.
different sensor technology and whatnot. But
Yep.
what's consistent across the bridge, and again, this is where I think my own insight was, is the underlying consistency of community resident, lack of trust, and a real opportunity as a life cycle monitoring solution, ongoing imagery, repeated monthly, weekly, whatever is appropriate, irregardless of what life cycle you're in,
Yep.
what stage of the life cycle you're in. It's a basis for that conversation to continue. And yes, at a given phase, I might extract different pieces of it for my own operational decisions, and that's value added still. But the underlying premise that I have reached is we've got to get from 27 to 30 years
Yep.
down to single digits. And that's truly going to make the difference between whether this current moment in time as a policy matter and a national security matter advances the way we recognize it has to. We've got to get these projects online, and we've got to really move the needle starting literally right now. I feel like we've got a few months, a few years. We don't have long to see this begin before the moment could elude us.
One of the things that you mentioned in that is interesting to me is the ability to move quickly and to move now, right? And I think entrepreneurs are great at making that decision. And even though, as you said, it should be simple, but it's not always easy. And having data points, having the momentum, having that critical mass counts for such a huge amount of what we get accomplished, right? And so I agree with you. I think that we are at a unique spot in, our global climate that we need to sort of press this forward aggressively. And I used to think that this was going to happen because the majors had money and they were going to do it. And I think more and more I've recognized that it's all of the entrepreneurs and the technologies and the junior exploration companies that are going to have to work really hard and solve problems fast so that they can lean on the others to adopt this. But I think that the failure, that's a big accusation in our industry, but the failure for us so often is that there's just not enough money and not enough time to go around, and that the big guys want it to be proven. They're not willing to absorb any level of risk or accountability for a technology like yours if it doesn't bump the stock price, if it doesn't make something happen from their perspective that needed to happen yesterday. And then that's your fault, not theirs. And so therefore they don't use it again. And it just, to me, is very short-sighted because we need to be supporting and absorbing some of the risk factor for the entrepreneurial side and the junior side of our industry so that it can throttle us forward in an accelerated pace at this point. And so it's a frustration for me. It's just another talking point. I'm sure you're seeing it to some degree, but without things being proven, it's very hard to get a conversation with individuals that have money to pay for stuff like this.
That's all true, and that's always true. Here, I really firmly do believe that the issue is bigger than me or anything I can bring to the table. The question that has to be addressed is how do we, as a practical matter, move the ball forward and reducing and it's policymakers, right? Policy is improving. That's great.
Yep.
But the whole idea of community license to operate, that's got nothing to do with policymakers.
Right.
That is the one area that I believe has not really shifted over recent years as technologies improved, policies possibly very much improving.
Yep.
The communities are still sensitive to protecting their own very localized way of life.
Sure.
Where the opportunity comes, it's almost the idea of it's human nature to be a little bit hesitant to reveal too much about ourselves.
Sure.
And
vulnerable.
For an operator to be asked to just open their doors to what's happening within their fence line on a proactive basis where we don't know what's going to happen next month. What if I have an incident and this imagery just comes out? I don't want that is almost a bigger obstacle. And you want me to pay for it also? Well, I don't think a whole lot, all things in the big picture. It is becoming, right. That's one of the things that's great today that 3 years ago, 5 years ago, the cost of access is really becoming the kind of thing that is, but it's still asking me to pay to reveal something about myself where it might be an unknown.
Sure.
But what is trust?
Yeah.
If we can't respect each other, if we can't respect our communities enough to just be willing to have that conversation, even if we don't know exactly where it's going,
Yeah.
I think we're just going to be faced with bottlenecks of projects being advanced for the foreseeable future. And we can't do that any longer. We just can't.
And I think what I'm hearing you say is there's risk in what this could show. However, there is risk in what they're not already having in terms of the conversation. And so is it better to have this air of transparency and open dialogue regardless and say, look, we messed up and now we can see it, we can own it, we can talk about it. Like, I don't know that there's any big project, whether it's making a building or, whatever it might be. Like, we all mess up, and figuring out how to have the conversation and own it and fix it, I think is much better than kind of concealing it and pretending like it didn't happen. And perhaps that's something that we just need to become accustomed to in the mining industry that we haven't had the opportunity to do previously. But I think it is becoming expected. And I think it's important.
I think you've summed it up nicely that the risk of taking proactive steps to move the ball forward is easy to argue a much lower risk than not doing so.
Yeah. Interesting. Well, I think that it would be, I would love to see this be the beginning of my Super Bowl commercial and the end of the Super Bowl commercial where we like pan in and we see the beginning of the Mize fast forward and then like the closure piece and with all the other pieces in between. So hopefully somebody with lots of money can go and produce this for us and pay you to make part of it happen. So with all of that, I guess a question I love to leave in sort of closing is what are you doing from your perspective that makes mining a better place?
In all the roles I've had through my career, whether it's been in the field in oil and gas or policymaker work, merchant marine, now playing with space tech, the personal relationships matter more than they teach you in grade school. I've really found that being present is so important, and having a human connection with the people you work with can really lay a necessary foundation in accomplishing anything, certainly as it relates to the quality of just being a professional, a human going through life. And it's trust. How do we advance it? The mining sector is absolutely leaning forward today in wanting to provide the materials necessary so your families, your neighbors, people you grew up with have what they need to have a comfortable place to call home, keep it climate controlled in the winter and the summer, be able to get where you need to go, and to do so keeping everybody safe and to keep the places where they live beautiful and clean. That's really the opportunity that I think we're looking at collectively. Technology's funny. It takes years to have smartphones in place before it becomes just such an integral part of how we do our day to day. I think part of the new frontier is satellite imagery, satellite communications. Like, look at Starlink. It's going to revolutionize how people in more distant communities stay engaged with how fast the pace of the world employment, it's all moving. I think satellite imagery is going to offer solutions that we haven't even really begun to imagine the potential, just the way when the first smartphones came out, we couldn't have imagined an Uber app completely changing the way we get to the point that a lot of people don't have cars anymore because they don't need them because of a smartphone. Right.
Yep.
So to just see this germinating today and have a glimpse at how the technology, which by itself is great, but it's not the point, how the technology can facilitate the type of discussion between us, between Lindsey, you and me, and yep. our employers and our industries and where our industries work, to have truly constructive dialogues, because that gets us over the unknown that has allowed trust to be really eviscerated in years past. and slow down the industry's ability to advance with the state of the market demand, leaving us a little bit behind the eight ball right now. And I think we can call that back.
Well, it's kind of a romantic vision. I like what you left us with, that we now have such an opportunity to, one, fix things, and two, work together and bind together with constructive relationships that, hurdle us forward in a time that is really important. So thank you.
It's a pleasure to be here. Needless to say, we've been trying to build a path forward on these solutions, and others are out there too. But I welcome this conversation. I'm glad to see a dialogue that's beginning to happen more and more. And it's going to be very fun to see where it all goes. So thanks for including me, Lindsey.
Thank you for taking the time with us and sharing more about yourself and your journey and the company and your vision. And my hope is that we see all of this come into play in more significant fashion, and certainly in the Super Bowl coming to you very, very soon.
Look forward to it. It is coming for sure. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you for being here.